and welcome to the world of practical gardening. We're going to tell you the story of a vegetable garden over a period of about 18 months. You'll see how to enrich the soil without harsh chemical fertilizers, how to divide it up into beds for easy rotation, and how to produce the most wonderful, magnificent vegetables in cool, temperate, or with some adjustment, even tropical climates. So let's get cracking. What on earth can you do with a so-called lawn like this? It's a mess and it's hard to look after. Well, you can do what I'm going to do. I'm going to make it productive. I'm going to turn this into an organic vegetable garden. The first thing to do is to mark it out like that, you see, and that means taking out a strip of turf all the way along like that. You see, you can slice it out, see? Then you know where you are. The entire cultivated area will be about 10 metres long and 4 metres wide. That'll give me 4 beds for a 4-year rotation system, and the whole thing's in full sun, and that means the plants will thrive. Now to strip off this surface growth here. It'll make the most marvellous compost, but it's blooming hard work. I know a far easier way. I'm using a heavy-duty rear-mounted rotary hoe. You can hire these just about anywhere. But what I've done, I've adjusted the blade so it's just more or less tickling the ground. That means it will pulverise that turf, make it much easier to rake up, and then the ground will be ready for that deep cut. But first of all, the manure's got to go on. This is sheep manure, but you can use just about any kind of manure over the surface so it can all be pulverised in later on. But even the manure has to be supplemented, and you know what I'm going to use. It's your favourite and mine, blood and bone, with a little bit of potash too, and plenty of it. This next stage is the most important of all. It's the deep cultivation stage. And what I'm doing, I'm mixing in all that manure and blood and bone and potash into the soil. That means I've had to set the blades fairly deeply. But it also means I've got to go backward and forwards several times, each time adjusting the blades lower and lower until I achieve the full depth. By this time, the soil's ready and those vegetables should be jumping out of the ground. But I have to define the 4 beds first, and that's easily done by simply piling up the soil and creating the paths at the same time. And all this lovely mixture of soil and manure, it's going on these beds, and it's also adding to the drainage, which is marvellous. Now, each of these beds are only 2 metres wide and about 3 metres long, but that gives very easy access with a rake or a hoe for weeding and general cultivation. But the paths, they not only go through and divide up the beds, they go all the way around too. That means you can get in from any direction. And as a final finishing off, sawdust over all the paths to keep your boots nice and clean. Well, let's see what we've got after all this strenuous effort. Well, this is the acid lover's bed. This is for tomatoes and capsicums and eggplants. This one here is a bit bigger, and it's for the wonderful companions like sweet corn and pumpkins and zucchinis and all that tribe. This one's a bit smaller. It's for the root crops, but it'll still hold a lot of carrots and parsnips and beetroot. And here, we can plant this one straight away. It's for the legumes and also for the cabbages too. Look at these lovely summer cabbages. And to put them in, it's quite simple. But first of all, I'm using some of this stuff here. This is dolomite. It'll sweeten the soil. The soil's not settled yet, so I'm going to put some of this in. It's nothing more than mushroom compost. It'll give the plant a lovely start while the soil is settling. There it is there. And another one too. There they are. Once more, a little bit of dolomite there, see? And now some mushroom compost. Right, straight in there. It's on its way. Now don't forget, this is the legume bed. So we can put in peas and later on beans too. Now I'll show you a marvellous method of doing it. This is just an ordinary hole, but just look at the width of this drill that I'm creating here in this soil. See how wide it is there, like that? It's not all that deep really. Now, in the base of that, I'm putting some of this stuff. That's right, more dolomite limestone. And it's a very windy day, by the way, but we can get away with that, see? That'll sweeten the soil. And now the peas can go in, see? Now watch the way I'm putting them in. I'm scattering them like that. See how I'm scattering them around? over the surface there, like that. It's a very easy way of getting a lovely crop. And now to backfill. See? Just simply cover them over like that. These will sprout like mad in a matter of days, and it'll give a massive crop of peas. But don't forget, they definitely need staking. I'll tell you something, if you've got a lawn and you're sick of it and you're sick of mowing it, now you know what to do. All the soil settled down beautifully and it's ready to be planted now. You'll notice I've even put more sawdust there. You can see them outlining the bed. That'll keep the mud off my boots. And I've even put in a climbing frame here for the peas. We'll look at that later on. But the cabbages, honestly, they've really come on like a house on fire. Look at this one here. It'll be ready to eat in a few weeks' time, but the marvellous thing is the uneven development. They're all shapes and sizes. That means they're not going to be all coming in at the same time. But one thing they need, they want a good feed. And I've made some manure water with old sheep manure. They love it. Just pour it on. They'll soak it up like that. All leafy vegetables love this because it's full of nitrogen. And now for the pea climbing frame. I've just built this, and you know how long it took me? About 10 minutes. And you know why? Because it's so simple. All it is 5 garden stakes. 3 of them are driven into the ground, and there's 2 laced together at the top to give a kind of a stability. And all the way down are all these horizontal strings for the peas to climb up. And let's look at the peas. Can you remember how thickly I sowed them? Well, the birds have been pecking away there, trying to drag them out of the ground, but they've got bucklet hope and they're going to grow. And I swear that when they do grow, we're going to have a wall of lovely succulent pods on either side. And once the peas have been harvested, it's cabbages and cauliflower and broccoli into here where all this lovely nitrogen is waiting. And as for this part here, this is for bush beans, and that'll mean the nitrogen will be coming in all the time. Now it's the time of the carrots. These are called Manchester table, but all carrots are highly nutritious. And you know why? Because they delve down deep into the soil and bring up all the minerals. But Manchester table's a good one because it's good to eat, and also because it's slow to bolt. This one's been growing in my garden all the winter, and look at the top there, no sign of bolting at all. But look at these and compare them. These here, they call these Majestic Red, and they are magnificent. If there's a problem, they go down too deeply in wet soil and they tend to get a bit scabby. That's nothing because you can always carve that little bit off. I'm not going to use these in this soil because it's a bit clay here. I'm going to use these here. These are the ones they call Chantenay. Can you see how kind of stump-rooted they are? They're lovely, they're juicy, and they're going to love it here. And now to sow the carrot seed in this second root crop bed. But there's something else. Remember, I churned up all this soil here with a rotary hoe, and they're notorious for causing a hard pan. That's why I'm using this thing here. It's a broad fork, and I'm using it to shatter and crack any subsoil and let all the air in down there. I've been over this bed a couple of times like that, and it's lovely and deep. And all that remains now is to work that surface to a lovely fine tilth ready to receive the seed. Now look, it's interesting, isn't it? This was a blooming awful lawn only a few weeks ago, and look what's happened already. That's how productive a garden can be. And to put in the seed, first of all, make the drill like this. And look what's happened. You see this kind of a shallow groove here? It's perfect for carrot seed. There's the seed there. I put it in this jar with some river sand, and I've made a hole in the top. All you do is pour it out like that. That's how easy it is to sow carrot seed, lovely and spaced out. And to backfill, a simple matter. Just use the back of the rake to press it into contact so it's lovely and firm and ready to come up. And it's done. Do you know why this is the best time of the year to sow or plant summer vegetables? Because in cool and temperate districts, the soil now is absolutely marvellous and warm and gives any vegetables a flying start. I've already sown some beans here. These are bush beans, about 10 centimetres apart, and all that remains now is just to cover them over like that. See? So they're under the ground about 2 centimetres. See how easy that is? And just put them into contact. All they want now is a good watering. These, by the way, are snap beans, and they're delicious. Now, what about that disaster? It's the carrots. Remember how I sowed them? Well, they're up and they're coming up thick and fast. But look at this. Look at all the blooming gaps here. They failed to come up, and the reason why is because the seed bed dried out during germination. And it's marvellous because it's a lesson learned. I've already resown and these will be up and they'll soon catch up. Now, don't forget, this is the root crop bed, so there's stacks of room for more carrots and even beetroot and other root crops. In fact, I've already put in some lovely New Zealand butter Swedes. They're growing like mad. And look how I've seized that little bit of a space along the edge there to put some red mignonette lettuces in. They're ready to eat already. But this is the bed I'm interested in right now, because it's for the sweet corn and the pumpkins. That's why I've laced this ground here with this lovely mushroom compost. Look at that there. Because sweet corn adore the stuff. You have a choice. You can put in seedling sweet corn, and they're great at this time of the year, or you have the choice of seed. But I'll tell you something, the seed in the warm soil will leave these for dead, so I'm going for the seed. Now the kind I'm going to use, it's a super sweet. It's called Snow Gold, and they're the most delicious crunchy cobs I've ever eaten in my life. But to sow it, you need a drill. Look, so easy. Make a good firm one. Look at this lovely soil here. It's lovely and moist. And another one, about half a metre away. See? It's lovely, isn't it? And now to sow the seed. Now just watch this. There it is. See how close it is? Much closer than normal, because it can always be thinned out. That's no problem. And this, being what they call a shrunken seed, it's not so good at germination. So that means you've got plenty more to transplant if you do have a few misses. There they are, all the way along there like that. And don't forget, if they're a bit close, don't worry about it. Backfilling, dead easy. Look at that, see? And along here too. And they're in, and I swear they're on the move already. Pumpkins and zucchini and cucumber, they're different than sweet corn. They go in as seedlings at this time of the year. And all you do is put them into low mounds full of organic matter and old manure and water them well. Now, look at these tomato seedlings. I bought 2 punnets like this about 10 days ago. 1 punnet I divided up and put them separately in these containers. Now look at the difference, isn't it amazing? Now look, see the way the roots have already formed all over the place. Perfect for planting right now. There it is. This is how easy it is. So, it's grossless at the back here. They're going to grow this big and need staking. Here is Sweet Bite, quite delicious. Little tiny Tims and lots of capsicums and eggplants. I can hardly wait for next year. Everything's coming on like a house on fire. And do you remember the peas? Look, they've been cropped. They had the most marvellous yield. And now this frame, which is quite sturdy, can come out and get it out of the way over there. Now, let's have a look at the cabbages. Here they are. The interesting thing is they've never been sprayed. And remember, it's the caterpillar season. You can see where the caterpillars have been getting stuck into the leaves. But the marvellous thing about cabbage caterpillars is that they don't eat that part in the middle. That's the part that we eat. Now, to harvest a cabbage, look, you pull the whole blooming lot out of the ground like that. There it is, right? And now to cut it open. I'm using a pruning saw. There, see? It's easier that way. There it is. Now let's have a look. There it is. Look at that. Now look, it started to split open. That's beautiful. That's no problem at all. But look inside here. That is magnificent. What's that there? That's a little earwig. It won't do any harm. But now, what comes next? Well, the snap beans have shown amazing growth. Look at this here. Look at that there. Now, when you're harvesting snap beans or any of the bush beans, keep those pods picked all the time. They're beautiful, by the way. These here are absolutely crisp and delicious. And you can see how, there, look at that there. And to eat them raw is wonderful. They really are. They're so sweet and delicious. I know I sound as if I've got a mouthful, but they are lovely. But look, remember where the peas were? You can see the remains of the trash there. The roots are still in the ground. So I'm going to take advantage of that I'm going to plant some broccoli. There it is there. Right? That means that the broccoli will feed off all the nitrogen that's been put in the ground by the peas. I'll do the rest later because there's something else. If you recall, the first sowing of carrot seed here was a bit of a flop because they dried out. But these are not a flop. Look at that, that's lovely. Let's have a look at them. Here we are. Now look at that there. That's a beautiful carrot. But remember this, you must keep carrots not so much wet, but don't let them dry out, because if they get wet afterwards, they'll split all the way along the sides. The second sowing here, this is going to be for lovely winter eating, and that's fantastic, that's great. And the Swedes too, they're ready to eat already. Look at the size of that one there. It's beautiful, isn't it? But what about the sweet corn? Now you can see the benefits of all that lovely mushroom compost and manure that I dug in here. It's marvellous, isn't it? This is the male flower on the top here, and soon it'll develop some very heavy pollen. That falls down onto the silk of the female down below here. This is where the cob is. That's how it's going to form. But look right down at the very bottom there, because it's very interesting. You see those aerial roots that are coming down into the soil? It'll also form more roots here from that little ridge, and even more higher up. That's why sweet corn can be mulched very high up, and this is a mixture of pea straw, manure and blood and bone, and that means that all these roots are going to feed from this lovely, wonderful mulch, and you can virtually double the yield. But you've got to pour the water in. Golden zucchinis are absolutely delicious to eat. But you've got to keep them picked all the time, otherwise you'll have zeppelins all over your blooming garden. Have you noticed how nice and neat it always looks, especially the paths? The reason why is every time we come here, about every 2 or 3 weeks, I always put sawdust down. And that's to do with continuing to increase the fertility of the soil. I'll show you what I mean. Here's the sawdust I've just spread. There are the previous layers. You see how dark they've become? That's because they're breaking down and decaying. Now, watch what I'm going to do now. I'm going to use some of this stuff here. It's blood and bone, that's right. And I'm going to sprinkle it all over this sawdust, all over the path. And do you know why? Because it will accelerate the rate of decomposition, it'll rot down, and that means in about 2 months' time I can shovel the whole lot up and chuck it all over the beds, and that will enrich the soil. Now the pumpkins are coming on like a house on fire. This one's a butternut. Actually, it's a winter squash. And can you see how they're forming? They form on side shoots like that. The flowers come there too. And it's interesting, you can always tell a female flower, there it is there, because it's got this swelling at the back. And if you look into the flower itself, you can see what looks like a little golden wreath. That's how you can tell the female. Now, if it doesn't get fertilized, you get this, it goes black and it just drops off. But look, these runners extend about 3 meters or more, they'll keep on going. So when you get to the end, just nip them off and stop them like that. That means that all the energy now is going to go into making more and more lovely pumpkins. Now, this is the first time we've had a good look at the tomato bed since we planted them, and it's been very successful indeed. But look at this one here. This is a bit of a failure. Look at that. Can you see how miserable and withered looking the leaves are? So why has it happened? Because it's quite common. Well, I'll tell you why. The wind's been blowing it. It's broke its tie. Look at that. It's been blowing around all over the bed. Can you see the roots there moving continuously in the ground? It's got Buckley's hope of growing. What can you do? Look, I'm not going to tie it, but by threading a stake through that dense stuff there like that and belting it in like that, that'll hold it. That means it'll be there until the fruit form fully. It'll be lovely. But there's something else, and it's here. Now, these are supposed to be sweet bite. There they are, but they're a bit blooming big. It was the wrong label. I don't care, they taste delicious. But look underneath, right underneath there. Can you see where the branches are bearing against the soil? I don't know if you can see that, but there's all these little lumpy things there. It's trying to send out roots into the soil, but it can't, right? This is what you do. you get some of this stuff here. This is moist mushroom compost, and you tuck it in like that, and then you rest it on it so it'll send roots into that there. And there's something else. You also get dry straw, like that, so the fruit can rest on that so they don't go rotten in contact with the soil. But look at this one here. This is Tiny Tim. It's a lovely one. Look at that there. I've already mulched this, and you can see the kind of yield it's giving it. It's marvellous. But the interesting thing about this is the size of it. It only grows to about 30 centimetres. It's compact, it never wants staking, and that means it's perfect for tubs and containers. And all the time you get oodles of lovely sweet tomatoes. By the way, you must have noticed here and there a few gaps and open spaces starting to appear in this vegetable garden. Well, that's where all the harvesting is taking place. But you never waste these lovely open spaces. You constantly plant things in them. I'll show you what I mean. Do you know what this is here? I know it looks like a weedy looking lettuce, but it's what they call endive, and it's used in salads. And in fact, it has a kind of a sour, slightly bitter taste. It's beautiful, right? It tastes marvellous, but it's got to be mixed with other things. I'll show you how to plant it. You make a big hole like that. Now this is a real good way of growing endive. See the hole there? And this is what I'm going to put in there. It's mushroom compost. See that? Now that stuff there is the greatest invention since blood and bone, and this has got blood and bone in it too. There it is. See how much I'm putting in? Now I'm going to plant this endive in here. And there are several plants there. See them there? See them all? All together. Out it comes. See the roots? Now you tease them out a little bit like that. That means that they know where to go. And in it goes, so it's completely packed in this lovely mushroom compost, and plenty of it, like that. And then make good the soil. And the next thing is very important. You pour in the water. They love it. A good saturation. And now I'll show you something else. I'm going to plant a quick fill-in crop, but it's a very important one. I'm going to plant some lettuces. These are green mignonette. But look what I've done here. Can you see this groove? I've filled it with all this lovely mushroom compost and blood and bone. And the lettuces, they go straight in like this. Now look at the way I'm planting very carefully. See how I'm putting them in there like that? Note how widely spaced they are. There's a reason for this. Here we are, there's a lovely one. See, there it is there. Like that. The reason is because I'm also going to put some of these in. These are the red mignonette in between, because they're not big ones, but they're ready in about 8 weeks' time. We'll be eating these, and they're very nourishing and absolutely delicious. But one thing they need, lots and lots of water. Pour it on, because lettuces in well-drained soil can never be overwatered. It's only a little veggie patch, but it's highly productive. But remember, less than a year ago, it was a useless bit of lawn. Now it's feeding a family. That's what it's all about. The basis of this garden, as you can see, it's 4 beds. It's a 4-year rotation system, and I'm going to show you how it works. Now, this was the first bed that we sowed and planted. We put in peas and beans, and you can see that the beans are doing well still, and they're cropping marvellously. But when we cleared away the peas, all that lovely nitrogen that was in the ground has now been taken advantage of by the cabbages and the broccoli too. But when this lot has been cleared away, and that's pretty soon, the bed itself will be occupied next season by the root crops. Here they are now. And these two will be eaten and cleared away, and this bed will be occupied by the sweet corn and the pumpkins. And it's pretty obvious what's going to occupy the sweet corn bed. It's the tomatoes and the capsicums, and they're going to do very well here. But look at them in the existing bed here. You can see they're looking a bit miserable because they're getting to the end of their tether. But they've cropped like mad. Look at that there. And they're still cropping well. Now I'm going to show you a little trick. Tomatoes and capsicums, they're like an acidic soil, whereas the peas and the beans and the cabbages are going to come here. They're like a limey soil. I'm going to get in ahead. I'm going to put some dolomite limestone. There it is there. It's a bit coarse, but it'll do the trick. But I'm going to sprinkle it among these tomatoes. And it won't do any harm at all to the capsicums or whatever, right? But what it will do It'll help this straw rot down, and eventually it'll be beautiful, ready for the peas and the beans. I can't get over the enormous vigour of these sweet corn plants. I mean, when you consider this was miserable ground that's only grown grass before. Here's one plant. It's already got, I think, about 6 cobs on it. That's an indication of how rich the soil has become. And look at the cobs. You can always tell, by the way, when they're ripe, by that part at the end. It's called the silk, and it gets brown. That's one way. But you can also have a little peep. There it is there. That's definitely ready. Now look, to harvest, you take the top like that and listen. It snaps off quite cleanly. And then when you've got that, you break it again, and you're left with the sheath on it. And this is perfect for cooking, as it is like that, in a microwave. But to strip it, look, you can see the kernels there. That's it there. Now they call this one here snow gold, and they call it that because it's got the kernels are either white or golden colour, and children love that. It's so sweet. And when you pick it, you get it straight into the oven or into the pot as soon as possible. The other veggies that have yielded marvellously have been the carrots and the beetroot. Look at this here. Now this is interesting. Here's a beetroot growing next to a carrot. Now there's a bit of a lesson there. But listen to this too. Look, when you're lifting a beetroot, there we are, that's a good size. Look at that there. That's lovely and sweet and sugary. But always screw off the foliage like that. That means it won't bleed as it would if it was cut. And as for the carrots, look, this is a lovely Chantenay. There they are. That's a beautiful carrot there. But again, as soon as you get them out of the ground, off with those leaves. Do you know why? Because the leaves will soak out and suck out all that juice there, and they'll go all rubbery into a plastic bag like that. Now look at this here. Here is a beautiful lettuce. It's a mignonette, a brown one. But look at the row. You get little green ones and big brown ones. So why is it so? Well, for a start, the brown ones, or the red ones, they're not attractive to birds, whereas these get picked on all the time. That's why they're so little. This one here has been in the ground about 5 weeks, and it's already big enough to eat. A great lesson there. As for the endive, remember how small they were when I put them in just over a month ago? Well, look at them now. This is non-stop picking right the way through winter for beautiful salads. But the big problems right now are caused by the caterpillars. They're munching blooming great holes in the leaves of the broccoli and the cabbages, and I'm going to murder them. I'm going to use a biological killer. There it is there. And in fact, I've got it already mixed, and it's a question of just spraying it on like that. You can get this, by the way, from just about every garden centre and nursery. Get it under the leaves as well. It does the most wonderful job, and it's absolutely harmless to anything but caterpillars. But look at this here. This is a liquid manure. There it is. It looks awful. It's a bag of sheep manure, and you see that brown liquid there? It's ready to go on. Just pour it into a watering can like that, which is 3/4 filled with water. It's diluted. And now to apply it. And you can see what I'm going to do. I'm pouring it in over the roots and making sure I don't splash off that lovely spray. This is great for cool climates. But there's more. It's enriching the soil, and that's the great rule of organic growing. At the end of the season, the soil is even more fertile than when you started. It's time to go berserk and clear up the debris. There's nothing better than a good mattock to get rid of old sweet corn stalks. It gets the roots out too. As for the pumpkin trash, that can be just pulled out, but the whole lot will rot down in time. Here in the tomato bed, just pull them out of the ground. If there's any tomatoes still around, hang the whole bush upside down under a tree or something like that, and they'll ripen on the vine. But then the bed can be dug over, but push any straw to one side first. As for the pumpkin bed, I'm going to use a claw hoe, because that's enough. I'm going to use green manure here. The burning question is this: what exactly is green manure? Well, it's a plant that you dig in after it's grown to enrich the soil. This is Algerian oats. There it is there. And in fact, it's a grass that will grow, and when it's about knee-high and lovely and sappy and lush, it's dug in. It's wonderful. But there are other kinds of seed. These are known as tick beans. They love the cold, and in fact they thrive in the icy winter soil. And in fact they're a legume, so that means they put nitrogen into the soil. If you live in the tropics, you can use these, grey sunflower seed. When they're about knee-high, you dig them in and they're lovely. This is what they call rye corn. It's like Algerian oats, only it's thicker and lusher. Wonderful dug in. And annual lupins. Here they are, another legume, wonderful again for the nitrogen. And if you can't get any of these, you can get this. It's barley. That too can be grown until it's about knee-high and then dug in. The reason why I'm sowing annual lupins as a green manure in this bed, it's pretty obvious. It's grown pumpkins and sweet corn and it's absolutely exhausted. I'm going to put in a cocktail of green manure. I'm also going to use rye corn. There it is. Very generously indeed. It's cheap to buy and it grows like mad. But there's more nitrogen. What else? Basically tick beans. There they are. See how generous I am? They're all over the place, right? But as the icing on the cake, you can't beat it, and you know what it is. There it is, blood and bone, have a nip of that. It's good for the ground too. And I'm being extremely generous, because it's never ever wasted. And all you do is rake the stuff in, dirty the seed. And when you've done that, that's all. Just walk away. Now look, I'm not going to go away from this patch without growing a crop that we can eat. Broad beans. They're lovely and they love the winter cold. I've got the drills prepared. All you do is drop them in. And if a few come close together, you don't worry about it. And you see, double rows, you know why? Mutual support, right? And once you've got them in, all you do is backfill with a rake like that. It couldn't be easier. But there's one other thing that you can do. And it's this stuff here. It's potash. Looks like sugar. Sprinkle it over the surface like that, see? Very generously. They don't need nitrogen, but they love, absolutely adore, potassium. And they're in. So what have we got after all this lovely physical activity? Well, you can see for yourself. The whole cycle is being repeated. We've got green manure. We've got every bed cropping relentlessly. And all the time, the soil is growing more and more fertile. What more could you want? Last time I came here, I sowed some broad bean seed. Let's have a look how it's getting on. Well, you can see they're popping up with enormous vigour, in spite of the fact that the soil at night here now is almost at freezing point. But look at the gaps here, and you can see the birds have been rather busy too. Look, don't worry about that with broad beans. All you do is fill in the gaps with a new bean here and there, because with broad beans, no matter when you sow them, whether it's in autumn, winter or spring, they all come in at the same time, like that there. See? That's fixed, that one. Now there's something else, and it's very interesting. You know what this stuff is in here? There it is. That's fire ash, it's wood ash. It's marvellous because it's full of potassium. And broad beans, well, they adore it. Be very generous around them like that. And that goes for peas too, by the way. In fact, any of the legumes, they love this potassium because they don't need much nitrogen. And there's something else too. Can you see what I've done here? I've put a thick layer of manure, cheap manure, it's extremely cheap, all over the surface here. And the reason why is because this soil here, well, it's a bit heavy and sticky. And this breaks it up beautifully, either by digging it in like that, just dig it in, or leave it lying over the surface like that to gradually rot down over the next few weeks, and it'll improve the texture beautifully. And now here's the most wonderful surprise. Do you remember the green manure crop I sowed? Well, here it is. Let's look at it more closely. Here it is. Now you can see, and you can also see the roots here too. Look at that. And you can see the different types of plants that are involved. You see that part there, this grassy looking stuff, that is rye corn. It loves cold conditions and thrives in it. And the other plant here, it's a legume. There it is. And they're full, there's one there, right? And you can see the beany looking thing there? That is a tick bean. And in fact, they're already starting to form those lovely nodules on the roots. And that means more nitrogen into the soil. And look how lush the blooming thing is. It's hard to believe that this bed last summer grew a massive crop of sweet corn and pumpkins too. And later, it's going to grow tomatoes. But you must dig it in, not yet. But later on, when it's a bit taller, right? Because if you left it too long, it becomes so stalky, you'll even need one of these blooming chainsaws to cut it down. Now there's something else I want to show you. And this will astonish you. You know how I rave on about potato onions? Well, here they are, right? I love them. You put them in at this time of the year. In fact, they'll keep for a whole year. But this few here, this is how many I planted in my garden last year. And you know what I got? Well, see for yourself. It was absolutely amazing. And you can see now why these onions are so absolutely marvellous and so much in demand. You get at least a 10-fold increase for every one that you plant. And don't forget, you put them in a very simple way. All you do into prepared soil is you just screw them in like that, so their little noses are just sticking up like that. Pull them apart and screw them in. And by the way, you'll see this soil here, it's been laced with mushroom compost. Right? That means they're going to do extremely well. But mushroom compost is also loved by the garlic tribe too. Look at this lot here. Now I planted the equivalent of 3 clumps like this. I broke them up. And what did I get? There it is. There's about 30 bucks worth. That's how easy it is. And what do? Again, it's dead easy. Get one of these clumps and pull it apart like that into cloves. And each clove, and they're big, massive cloves, they're lovely these. And just shove them in like that, so they're just below the surface. There. Just shove them in, always with the plate down like that. And once you've got them in, I go over the whole lot of all the onions with dolomite, limestone, and they're on the way. You know what this funny looking tuber is? They call this a Jerusalem artichoke. And the remarkable thing about the food value of these, they contain no starch, but the carbohydrate basically is in another form. That means that people who are diabetics can eat these without any problems at all. Now you plant them quite simply in a corner of the garden, out of the way, because they run rampant, put a tuber in the ground, bury it like that, and that's all, and leave it. Never let anyone ever tell you that there's not much to do in the winter garden, because it's the busiest time of the year. It seems almost impossible to believe that this growth can occur in an extremely cold garden right through the middle of winter. But this is green manure. It loves it. And right now it's so beautiful and lush, and it's ready to be dug in. Look at that lot there. Isn't that absolutely beautiful? And to dig it in, look, it's a simple operation. All you do is simply turn the whole thing over and chop it up and add a few supplements if you can. It helps if you trample it down a little bit. And if it's a bit too springy and thick, you know what I do? I get sheep manure or any other kind of manure, and I chuck it around all over the place, and it weighs it down and it flattens it out, and that makes it even easier to dig. And you turn it in as much as you can. If you find the odd worm, you're lucky because you're using a spade, so if you've got one that's not been cut in half, that's fine. But keep on digging, and once it's in the ground is full of lovely manure and blood and bone and just about everything else, and it's getting richer all the time. Now, if it looks a little bit messy when you've finished, it's supposed to look like that with all this green stuff still sticking up. Remember, the bulk of the green manure now is under the ground, and it'll rot away with incredible speed. Now for the high-speed onions. Gloves off, very delicate operation. You can see what I've done. I've made this groove here, and you can see how I've laid these onions down, and I'm putting them down flat. That's right, they're not sticking up at all, right? That's the way you do it. Very, very fast indeed. That's why I call it the high-speed method. Now look at this here. See my trowel here? You just backfill just to cover the roots like that, see? All the way along. Very, very easy indeed. And it'll all pick up in a matter of days, no worries. Now I'll show you another little trick that'll give you massive production of peas, or if you live in the tropics, beans. Look what I've done here. I've dug a trench and I've backfilled it. But before I did so, I lined it with newsprint here. That'll hold the moisture, especially in a dry district. And on top of that newsprint, there it is there, is all sorts of organic matter, old straw, and even sheep manure, and dolomite too. A lovely little ladder there waiting. I'm going to bury it like that. That's what I've done all the way along there. Do you know what you get? You get the perfect seed bed for peas or for beans. There's some lovely peas there, beautiful, aren't they? And to sow them, honestly, really as quick as that. As quick as that, see? Doesn't matter if they're a bit close together. And all you have to do then, there we are, is backfill. And backfilling really is dead easy. I do it with a rake, see? Just cover them over, like that. And then I kind of thump them like that to get them into good contact. And what have we got? Well, you see, this is now the legume bed. It had tomatoes in last year, and they did well. But I've also planted something else. You've got broccoli and cabbage as well, and they're going to take off too. And now I'm going to add to this little garden in a special way. You see this miserable little bit of lawn here? It's been down for decades, and in fact it used to be a tennis court. I'm going to grow some potatoes under straw with a special additive. I've picked an area about 4.5 metres long and a bit over 1 metre wide, enough for 2 rows of spuds. And I cover all the grass like that with lots and lots of old manure and blood and bone as well. Now, a layer of newsprint, thick layers of it, and it's saturated too, so it won't blow around all over the place. And now for the seed potatoes. Look, make sure they're certified, they're very good ones. And plant them out in a normal way, straight on top of that newsprint. They look a bit silly. Now, over comes the straw. Great thick layers of it. It's got to be very thick and very deep. And the straw must also be enriched with lots and lots of old manure and blood and bone too. I even put dolomite in too. But I also add lots and lots of sawdust to keep out the light. And then the whole lot is totally saturated, and they're on the way. Now, over the next 2 or 3 months, we're going to keep an eye on these spuds and see how they develop, because it's going to be very interesting to see what kind of yields that we get. But one thing is quite clear. It's a week to go for spring, and yet this garden has already started. You can't get much better than that. The broad beans are growing like mad. They're in flower, and you know what that means. It means that in a very short time they're going to be laden with lovely, succulent and quite delicious pods, and that means lovely beans later too. But remember this about broad beans. They get top heavy and they're extremely brittle, so these will have to be tied up. But the fascinating thing is what happened to the peas I sowed. You know, some people were quite amazed and even horrified because I sowed the seed so thickly. But now you can see why. Look at the seedlings here. Can you see the way these leaves here have been snapped off? The reason why is because the birds are trying to tug them out of the ground so they can eat the peas. You can control this by putting a little bit of bird wire over the top and just line it on. That keeps the birds at bay. And then, when the peas have grown a little bit, the birds are no longer interested and you can take the wire off. This is the stuff that brassicas love best of all. It's liquid manure. Now look, I know it looks horrible, but all it is a bit of sheep manure thrown into a bucket of water and watered on almost immediately, so it's lovely and weak. What we have here is broccoli and cabbages all the way along, a nice little mixture. And I'll tell you something, if you want to put some in, if you like this lovely veggie, put them in now, and it means that they're up and they're eaten before the caterpillars have buckles up of getting at them. Now, if you remember, it's only a few weeks ago when this bed here was a great mass of dense green manure, and I dug it in. Let's see what happened to it. And it's amazing, because it's already started to break down beautifully. Now, this bed here is for tomatoes, but the soil is still too cold, and in fact it's too cold even in temperate districts. But by all means, buy your tomatoes. Have a look at them. You can see these long, lanky ones and the short, sturdy ones. It's the sturdy ones which are the ones you should get. They're the best. And look what I've done. I've potted them on into these recycled food containers. There they are, and it means that these can be kept under cover, under glass if possible, and allowed to develop until the soil is warm enough to receive them. Now here's something of great interest to carrot lovers. This is called Manchester Table. I sowed the seed in January this year, and you can see there's no sign whatsoever of it bolting to seed and becoming woody. In fact, it's quite delicious and still quite crispy in there. Now, the other thing, can you remember me putting those onions in? I laid the seedlings completely flat on the ground, and now they've all stood up and they're growing beautifully. Now I'm going to make you extremely frustrated. Do you know what these are here? It's called oca, Oxalis tuberosa. You eat them like potatoes and they are delicious. You can roast them, steam them, even stick them in the microwave and they are superb, and they taste like sweet potatoes. There they are. Look at the size of the tubers. Now it's frustrating because they're hard to get. I got these from a greengrocer. You might be able to do the same. Don't come knocking on my blooming door, okay? Right, and to plant them, just like spuds, drop them in a hole in the ground like that, and backfill, and you'll get a massive yield. It's hard to believe that this manure and straw was twice as thick when I first shoved some seed potatoes underneath a few weeks back. Let's have a look what happened. For a start, it was laid over lawn. Under the newsprint there, you can see all the grass has been killed. Here's a spud. Look, it's already started to penetrate the straw, and you know what that means? The most fantastic crop. Put it back carefully. Now you can see where we're up to. Liquid manure for your lovely leafy vegetables. Divide up your tomatoes and pot them up. Don't forget to try and get some oca if you can, and it's not too late to plant some lovely potatoes under straw. That's how exciting it all is. Just before winter, I sowed 2 double rows of broad bean seed, and look at the marvellous result. I've never seen such luxuriant growth. And not only that, but these beans are doing good to the soil too. But look at the crop. You see, these beans are delicious to eat, even in the pod, so you don't have to wait. But once they've swollen up, those seeds are really lovely and sweet. As for the peas, well, there they are. They're coming out into flower already, and some are already starting to form the pods. And you know what I've done? I've taken the liberty of sowing some beautiful, lovely butter beans. There they are. Some there, right? They're most magnificent eating, and they look good on the plate as well. But at the base of every one of these stakes, I've pushed in 2 climbing beans. They'll come on, they'll be out of the ground in a matter of 10 days or so, and they'll be up the poles in no time. And can you remember, all these cabbages and cauliflower, I gave them a great going over with liquid manure last time I was here. You'll notice not a single bite mark or insect in them. Look at the way they're developing in the middle there. And beans will take their place. Can you remember the tomato seedlings I potted on into these margarine containers? Now I'll show you why I did it. Look at the roots there. Can you see how many there are? In fact, this is slightly root bound, and believe it or not, that's good. And the reason why is because it forces the plant into flower. There's quite a little truss of them there. It's ready to go in, the soil's ready. And a lovely way to plant with the straw to one side like that, and make a hole. Can you see how rich that soil is now with all that green manure in there? And just plonk it in like that. Doesn't look much now, but it'll come on, and firm it. And now, I'll tell you the most marvellous way of doubling the yield of tomato plants. This is what you do. You push the straw and the manure hard and quite firmly against the stem like that, so just the top sticking up. And as it settles, it rots. And the tomato plant actually sends out subsidiary roots into this enriched straw, and you really will double the yield. And you can see what I've done. I've covered the whole of the bed with a thick, weed-suppressing mat of old straw and ancient manure. And that means that all these tomato plants here, they're never going to look back. And that goes for the capsicums too. And speaking of capsicums, look, you can get them in all sorts of delightful colours. And they're just as sweet, and they're just as easy to grow. Now, what about the pumpkins? Now, you can buy your pumpkins as seedlings, but they're often sold in pairs these days, and the reason why is you don't separate them because the roots are extremely fragile. You plant the blooming things in pairs, like that, into this soil, and you know what happens? Well, one goes one way, and the other goes the other, and that's fine. But can you see how rich this soil is? Look, it's lovely stuff, and it's so full of mushroom compost and ancient manure that it's even mounded. And that means that all these other pumpkins here, and they're miniature ones, and also cucumbers as well, they're going to absolutely thrive under these conditions. Well, as you can see, I've been a very busy lad. In fact, I'm having the time of my life. This is the root crop bed, and I've already sown a row of carrot seed. But what I did, I mixed the carrot seed with sawdust. That stops it from drying out at this time of the year. What kind of carrots? Well, because this soil here is a bit clay, I'm using these lovely stump-rooted varieties, and they're quite superb and lovely and juicy. But there's something else, and it's very interesting. Can you remember the potato onions I planted right in the middle of winter? Well, here they are. You can see the way they grow. And if you look closely, you can see the new onions forming on each single onion that was planted. And you're going to get a lovely, tremendous crop because they're very prolific. But there's something of major importance. It's the potatoes under straw, and here they are. They're all up, they're growing like mad, they've never been watered, they've never been weeded or dug or anything, and they never will be until they're harvested. Let's have a little peep. Here we are. That's one thing you can do with this method. And there it is. You can see the little ones just burying up there quite beautifully. In other words, this lot here are going to crop like mad. It really is quite easy. And what have we got now? We have a garden here that's more or less ready for summer. It's fully equipped, and if you've not even got yours ready yet, there's still time in many cool and temperate regions of Australia. And all I can say, it's dead easy. We've not been back here since last November, and very little has been done apart from a bit of watering. And yet, it's unbelievable what's occurred. For a start, the broad beans have all been harvested. They made a delicious Christmas lunch. But in the place, in this nitrogen-enriched soil, I've put in the winter brassicas. They're going to do extremely well. And in fact, I've taken full advantage of the fact that it's absolutely pouring with marvellous rain. I don't care at all about it, to plant these brassicas. They love it. And here, this is where the peas were. They've all gone too. So this frame here can be neatly stored away just like that, and in their place goes the broccoli. But here are the bush beans. Can you see how small and kind of curly they are? Well, believe it or not, it's not enough water. They're certainly getting plenty today, but they could do with a good drink. And as for the climbing beans, they're doing extremely well. But it will help if they were tied a little bit every now and then, and probably a few bits of string as well. Now look at this here. Isn't it wonderful? It's hard to believe that these tomatoes have been virtually ignored for about 3 months, and yet they're so dense and thick that weeds have got Buckley's hope of coming through. But some people worry about the way tomatoes grow. They're kind of floppy. Look at this here. That's the way they want to grow. Now, what do you do about it? You can either pick them up and secure them to a stake, or do as I do, the easy way, just shove some nice straw underneath. That means that they can rest on them and the fruit will ripen on the straw and it won't get dirty. But these have done beautifully, haven't they? These indeed are quite a little triumph. Now, here we've got the sweet corn and the pumpkins, and they're madly in love with one another. In fact, they are companions. Look at the way they're embracing here. There's no problem about that. But you see these long runners of the pumpkins? See how the little pumpkins are forming there? Look, pinch off the growing tips all the way around. You'll get better fruit. It'll be more compact within the bed, right? And there's no question about it, there'll be no more problems of encroachment. As for the carrots, well, half this row's already gone. That's how delicious they are. Look at these. These were sown in November and they're still continuing to swell. But look, if you want to sow more carrots, it's a perfect time unless you live in the coldest parts of Australia. And that means lovely winter and spring eating. And as for these here, they look like oxalis, and you're dead right, Oxalis tuberosa or ocker. And if you're growing ocker, let the whole foliage die down at the end of autumn, and then you can harvest those lovely tubers. As for the potatoes, they're the great success story of this garden. If you remember, these are potatoes under straw that were simply placed out over a bit of old lawn. Let's investigate. Well, for a start, This stuff here, it's nothing more than old straw and manure mixed together. And these potatoes here, they were planted in August and they've never been dug, it's never been watered, it's never been weeded, and no work at all. Now let's see what we've got underneath. There they are, look at them. They're everywhere. I'm afraid this lot needs mechanical harvesting. Now this is an interesting one here. It's gone green because the light's got at it. It's poisonous. You can't eat green potatoes, they must go to waste. But it does give a fairly good indication about how to store them. Store them in a bag, particularly a Hessian bag so that the air can get in, and pack them after they've dried off a little bit, about an hour in the sun, and they go into a place where it's quite dark. Otherwise, if any light gets into the bag, the whole blooming lot will go green. Well, in spite of this enormous harvest, what about this bed now? Well, believe it or not, it's still the richest bed in the entire garden, and that's what I call good gardening. Holes in the leaves of cabbages. There they are. It's a common problem at this time of the year. But in this case, it's not caterpillars, because there's none there. The culprits are slugs, and there's the evidence, the slime trail. And there's ways of dealing with these little critters. But what can we do about these slugs? How can these plants be protected in the safest possible way without using any poisons at all? And the answer is this stuff here. It's hydrated lime. Cabbages love lime, but slugs absolutely hate the stuff. And put it around quite generously like that. But there's something else. You can also use this stuff here. It's sawdust. Slugs hate this too because it causes them to run out of juice, and so be generous with that as well. And believe it or not, that'll fix them. Remember those bush beans? Well, I've just ripped the lot out because they're finished and we got a good crop. But in their place, I've put some broccoli because they can feed off all that lovely nitrogen in the soil. And broccoli, you'll be eating these in a matter of weeks. But the things that fascinate me more than anything else are the scarlet runner beans. Other people are fascinated too because sometimes they won't bear. They need cool nights. Look at this. Can you see where the pods have dropped off there? But you can also see the little pods starting to form there because we've had cool nights. If you don't get them, at least you get the flowers. But it's still interesting to see how they form. There's the flower there, see it? And there's a little tiny pod there just beginning to form. And then as you go down the stem, you can see the pods getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And these are absolutely delicious. If you've got a cool climate, these are the ones to go for. And on this side of the climbing beans, I'm planting a row of silver beet. They'll do well here. But if you remember, last winter I had the most wonderful crop of broccoli here. But I can't plant any other member of the Brassica tribe for another 4 years because of disease problems. Now, I've mentioned about the cool summer we've had here in Hobart. In fact, it's been the coldest summer since records were kept. And yet, look at the tomatoes and the way they've developed. But there's still a few problems. Despite being the most marvellous crop, the blooming things are still lagging behind when it comes to ripening. Now, never make the mistake of pulling off leaves to expose these green tomatoes to the sun. It doesn't work that way. It's not the sun's rays that ripen tomatoes, but the temperature, and in fact the direct rays of the sun can often scald them on a hot day. But look at the way they're flopping around here. Look, it's too late to tie them up now, so leave them. They're too brittle anyway. But when you do harvest them, you can always tell when they get kind of pink right at the very base. That's when you pick them, take them indoors and let them ripen inside, and they taste beautiful. But there's still plenty of ripening time left, and we're going to get a great yield from this bed alone. But it's the pumpkin bed that's really quite remarkable. It's hard to believe that it's only about 3.5 meters long and 2 wide, and yet the yield is quite fantastic. Look at these, here's some of them. These are the little miniature pumpkins. See those there? You eat these whole. You either roast them or steam them, and they're beautiful and very sweet and nutty. But compare the size with an ordinary pumpkin. See the difference there? Right? And these are sweet grey. These will keep a year if they're harvested correctly, and that means that they must have that hollow sound. And that stalk there, see, that must kind of shrivel a little bit. And if that happens and they're kept under the right conditions, they are wonderful. And of course, there's always the beautiful winter squash. These two can be steamed and cooked whole, and they're magnificent. In this last bed, I've found a little bit of space, and I'm planting out some beautiful red mignonette lettuces. Now look, there's only a square metre here. There's still a few carrots growing on, but even in this tiny area, I can grow up to 20 of these beautiful lettuces, and they're going to taste great. So you can see what's going on in an autumn garden. We've put in some new broccoli, silver beet, the beans are coming on, tomatoes are marvellous, and of course there's lots of pumpkins as well, and we've even got a little bonus with a lettuce. It's a constant, ongoing process. That's the joy of growing your own. The amazing thing is that the cost of this garden over the entire period was a bit over $200. And of course the labour was quite free. But I'll tell you what, I couldn't imagine a more satisfying type of work. I'd recommend it to anyone, young or old, especially if you have a lawn and you're sick and tired of mowing it.